Here I have 29 different quotations for the character Sheila in J.B. Priestley's play An Inspector Calls. But which 10 do I think are most important for you to analyse? Let's find out. Hey everyone, it's me, Liam, aka Mr. Knight, aka DystopiaJunkie. And if you're watching this video, then it's because you're looking for some quotations about the character Sheila Birling in J.B. Priestley's play An Inspector Calls. Well, you've come to the right place, because in this video I'm going to provide you with a quick summary of her character, 10 quotations, and then a quick discussion about what I think J.B. Priestley's intentions were when writing this character. I will be saying a lot of things that won't necessarily be appearing on screen during this video, so you might find it useful to grab a pen and paper now before I get properly started. That way you can make sure that you can get the most out of watching this video. And of course, if, as you're watching this video, you think that it's super helpful and that you would like to see more content like this, you can of course let me know by dropping the video a like, commenting on it, and obviously subscribing to my channel too. Recently I have hit the 400 subscriber mark, and so I guess the race is on now to hit 500. So here is my quick summary of Sheila. So Sheila is obviously a Birling and presumably their only daughter, meaning that her role in the family is to do as she is told and to eventually marry in to another family. She is in her early 20s in 1912, so she would have belonged to the same generation as J.B. Priestley, who was 18 in 1912. She is engaged to Gerald Croft, telling us that she has performed the duty that was expected of her as a young woman in 1912. Namely, finding a husband. She appears to be quite childish and giddy at times in the play, but even at the play's beginning we can see that there may be more to her than this, as she teases Gerald half playfully, half seriously. Over the course of the play, Sheila appears to be the most insightful character. She understands what the inspector is doing and generally seems to figure things out. And importantly, her role in Eva Smith's suicide was that she got her fired from her job at Millward's, which is a shop that Sheila frequently goes to. She did this out of pure jealousy, because when Eva held up a dress that Sheila looked bad in, she looked beautiful, and so Sheila got her sacked. So with all of that out of the way, let's have a look at some quotations. Right, so here is the first quotation that I have selected for Sheila. As I did for my 10 quotations for Mr. Birling, a link for which is appearing on screen about now, I will start with the play's opening stage directions. For Sheila, the stage directions say, Sheila is a pretty girl in her early 20s, very pleased with life and rather excited. These stage directions highlight Sheila's youthfulness, beauty and happiness, which might suggest that she is not a particularly serious character. And here we have the second quotation for Sheila. It comes right at the start of the play, at the end of her and Gerald's engagement party. When Arthur encourages Mrs. Birling to drink, Sheila says, "Yes, go on, mummy, you must drink our health." This quotation reveals two things to us. Most obviously, we can see that Sheila refers to her mother as mummy, which is something we see a few times in the opening stages of the play. This makes her seem much younger than her 20 or so years, and so you could say that she seems immature, infantile, or inferior to her parents. However, slightly conversely to this though, Sheila also seems somewhat assertive in this quotation. She is telling her mum what to do, albeit in a very soft way. These two interpretations combined could make Sheila seem like a bit of a spoiled brat. Okay, so here we have two quotations. So technically you've got 11 quotations for Sheila in this video rather than 10. These two come in quick succession though, and are only separated by a tiny line of dialogue from the inspector, and they achieve more or less the same thing, so I'm sticking them together. These two quotations are Sheila's response to finding out that Eva Smith has killed herself by drinking some strong disinfectant. Of course, the stage directions in the first quotation exemplify her heightened emotional state, but that's kind of obvious. It would be hard to do any meaningful language analysis of rather distressed that went beyond defining those two words. However, her dialogue that follows is also indicative of her feeling rather distressed. The sentences in these lines of dialogue are all fairly short, which creates a quick pace, which could represent her state of distress. The punctuation achieves this also. The exclamation mark shows her heightened emotional state, the dashes show that she is flustered and cannot think coherently, and the succession of two questions shows that she is desperate for more information, but cannot wait for the answers. Across these two quotations, Sheila asks three questions. What was she like? Quite young? Pretty? Depending on how you interpret this, you could look at Sheila in quite a positive light here. By asking this many questions, Sheila shows that she genuinely cares about Eva's death, even though she did not know her. By asking these questions, Sheila is trying to relate to Eva and empathise with her. You could argue though, if you're a bit of a cynic, that Sheila's questions are quite shallow. She asks about Eva's age and appearance, which might suggest that she is vain and shallow, or that she only cares about people who are like her. The next quotation is something that Sheila says after the inspector suggests that Mr. Birling does not see his employees as people, but sources of cheap labour instead. Sheila's response is super important. She says, "But these girls aren't cheap labour, they're people." This quotation shows that Sheila does not necessarily share the same wholly capitalist views that her parents hold. Whereas I am cautious to say that she is a socialist, I think it would be hard after all for somebody like Sheila to be purely socialist, given the advantages we can assume that she has had in her life due to her social class. But I am definitely happy to say that she has some socialist sympathies. In short, this quotation means that she sees the women that her father employs as people first, rather than sources of cheap labour, which is essentially the reverse of what Mr. Birling has to say. If we're thinking about form for a moment, about this text as a play that is acted out rather than a book that is read in our heads, then we can see that Priestley specifically wanted the actress playing Sheila to stress the word people. This could be important for a number of reasons. Firstly, it humanises them, which Mr. Birling apparently does not do. Secondly, it is in the plural form, people, rather than the singular, person, suggesting that the amount of people in this position is vast. Finally, people is generic. The working class do not have much in the way of identity, perhaps reflecting the fact that Sheila does not really know or understand them. Or this could reflect the fact that the working class had little power or say in 1912. Our next quotation for Sheila is her response to Gerald at the end of Act 1, when he says that he can keep his affair with Eva/Daisy secret from the inspector. Sheila's reply is, after laughing rather hysterically, "Why, you fool! He knows! Of course he knows, and I hate to think how much he knows that we don't know yet. You'll see. You'll see." So I've picked this quotation for a few different reasons. The first is that it does indeed present Sheila as rather hysterical. The stage directions obviously do this, but so too does Sheila's dialogue. Her dialogue is made up of mostly short sentences, which creates a rapid pace, reflecting her slightly unhinged frame of mind, as too does the repetition of "you'll see." She is starting to sound a little mad. But why is she mad? All of this is coming out after she has found out that her fiancé has had an affair. And she's found this out on the night of her engagement party, no less. Sheila's hysteria and fury are brought about because she is immensely upset about the things she has found out about Gerald. She really does, or did, love him. Secondly, I have selected this quotation because it presents Sheila as insightful. Out of all of the Birlings and Gerald, she is the one who understands the inspector's methods the most. She has seen him for what he is, some sort of omniscient detective. And she has also seen how he is letting the characters fall into the trap of revealing things about themselves. This is perhaps why she is so honest with him. She knows that any lie is futile. Our next quotation comes a little bit later, once the inspector has finished questioning Sheila and is beginning to interrogate Gerald. Gerald doesn't want Sheila to stay around and listen to his involvement with Eva/Daisy, and yet Sheila is adamant that she is staying. The inspector explains that Sheila must stay and hear Gerald's involvement, otherwise she will feel totally responsible for Eva/Daisy's death for the rest of her life. Sheila's response to this is, eagerly, "Yes, that's it, and I know I'm to blame, and I'm desperately sorry, but I can't believe, I won't believe, it's simply my fault that in the end she committed suicide. That would be too horrible." This quotation is interesting for a number of reasons. At its surface level, Sheila accepts responsibility, as seen in the phrase, "I know I'm to blame," which is good. Sheila is now behaving responsibly and in an unselfish way. She regrets her actions too, as seen in "and I'm desperately sorry," with the adverb desperately really emphasising how bad she feels about Eva/Daisy's death. However, she agrees with the inspector very eagerly and says that she won't believe that it is simply her fault that she committed suicide. Just how much blame is Sheila accepting? Maybe she's willing to take some responsibility, but not all of it. Our next quotation comes after Gerald has been thoroughly questioned by the inspector. Emotional, he excuses himself and says that he will go for a walk. Sheila hands him the engagement ring and says that they need to rebuild their relationship. Mr. Birling steps in, trying to defend Gerald, as he's only done what young men tend to do, apparently. Sheila's response is swift. She says, "Don't interfere, please, father. Gerald knows what I mean, and you apparently don't." Now, what's important about this quotation is that it is clearly an interruption. If you have your copy of the text to hand, open it to this quotation, which is a little over halfway down page 40. Mr. Birling's line of dialogue ends with a long dash, which is used to signify that his words are not finished, and that the next character to speak speaks over him. Sheila interrupts her father, showing a level of maturity and independence that we have not necessarily seen from her before. Moreover, the things that she says are important too. Firstly, she calls Mr. Birling father and not dad or daddy, which we imagine she probably does, given that she calls her mother mummy at the start of the play. Sheila's language choices have become less infantile, suggesting that she is maturing as the play progresses. Furthermore, the first sentence of this line is a command. Don't interfere, please, father. Although she is still being polite, she is very much telling her father what to do or not do. This inverts the power dynamic seen in families in 1912. The father was the one to boss his children around, and yet here, Mr. Birling's child, his female child no less, gives him an order, which he seems to follow. Our next quotation for Sheila comes in Act 3, once the inspector has left the Birling household. In response to Mr. Birling's claim that there's every excuse for what he and Mrs. Birling did, Sheila interjects and says, "I behaved badly too. I know I did. I'm ashamed of it. But now you're beginning to pretend that nothing much has happened." This quotation is significant for two reasons. First of all, the frequent use of the first person pronoun shows us that Sheila is aware of her poor behaviour and that she has accepted responsibility for the things that she has done. On a similar note, when she tells her father that he is beginning to pretend that nothing much has happened, Sheila is trying to adopt the assertive, mature persona that she has developed across the play. Although Mr. Birling does not bend to her will this time, it is still an example of Sheila clearly displaying that she has learned from the inspector's teachings. Our next quotation comes shortly after the previous one. The Birlings are now wondering whether the inspector was genuine or not. The older generation are now claiming that it makes a big difference if he was a fraud, whereas Sheila is adamant that it makes no difference whatsoever. In response to this, Mrs. Birling says, "Don't be childish, Sheila," to which Sheila responds with, flaring up, "I'm not being. If you want to know, it's you two who are being childish, trying not to face the facts." This quotation is interesting, as it shows the tension at the very heart of Sheila's character at the end of the play. On the one hand, she is trying to act maturely and responsibly, as she is trying to face the facts of the situation and feels guilty about how she treated Eva/Daisy, and is even trying to correct the behaviour of her parents. On the other hand, the stage directions tell us that she flares up when her mother calls her childish, showing a lack of control over her emotions, which could be seen as a very immature and childish reaction. To put it short, Sheila is still getting used to behaving in a grown-up way, and as such, she appears to make mistakes and gets things wrong from time to time. And here we have our final quotation for Sheila, which comes on the second last page of the play, and is one of the last things that she says. This is a response to the older generation feeling pleased with themselves, as they have just found out that there is no such person called Inspector Gould working for the local forces, nor has a young woman committed suicide by drinking a lot of strong disinfectant. Mr. and Mrs. Birling and Gerald all seem to be having a laugh, and as she readies herself to leave the room and go to bed, she says, "I tell you, whoever the inspector was, it was anything but a joke. You knew it then. You began to learn something. And now you've stopped. You're ready to go on in the same old way." Sheila's voice may as well be Priestley's here, Her insight gives the audience a clear summary of what is going on in the play. Although the older generation had started to learn from the inspector's lessons, they have now stopped and are carrying on as if nothing has changed whatsoever. This insight reveals to the audience that Sheila really has learned from the inspector, and they are left with the impression that she will behave differently towards others in the future. Her criticism of the older generation, they are ready, after all, to go on in the same old way, will ring in the audience's ears long after the play is over. Sheila is condemning people for not learning their lesson. But who is she really talking to here? Her parents and Gerald? Or the audience, who have been given a lesson in how they should or should not treat the less advantaged? As I said in my video for Mr. Birling, it is all well and good being able to remember quotations and their analyses, but you will not get into the top grades if you do not consider the author's intentions. Why did Priestley write Sheila the way he did? In other words, what would be missing from the message of the play if Sheila was not in it? So first of all, through presenting Sheila in such a positive way by the end of the play, Priestley is praising her generation. They are certainly better than the generation that came before them. Now, if Sheila was in her early 20s in 1912, she would have been in her mid to late 50s in 1945, the year of the play's premiere. Who else would have been roughly this age in 1945? Yeah, okay, Priestley, but also many of the play's audience members. By praising a character who could be seen to represent them, Priestley may be encouraging his audience to learn the same lessons as Sheila and do what they can to help those who are less fortunate. Secondly, Sheila is the character who, I argue, finishes the play best and undergoes a transformation from child to responsible young woman. Through presenting her in this positive light, Priestley may have been celebrating women and the rise in status that they experienced as a result of the two world wars. Through celebrating women, he may have been hoping that his flattery would have made the female members of his audience feel more inclined to take on his lessons and help others around them. After all, given women's increase in power in the post-war era, it was no longer just men who had to be socially responsible. And finally, by showing Sheila's positive transformation, a transformation that sees her edge towards more socialist modes of thought despite her presumably capitalist upbringing, Priestley may have been intending on showing that even the most wealthy people, we should remember here that his audience would have had a certain degree of expendable income if they were going to the theatre, are able to be part of the solution rather than the problems caused by capitalism. So there we go, that is Sheila Birling in J.B. Priestley's And Inspector Calls Analysed. I've summarised her role in the play, given you 10 or 11 quotations that I think are really vital, and even discussed Priestley's possible motivations for writing her the way he did. But what can you do next? Well, if you're looking for a way to turn this into a revision task you could revisit time and time again, why not turn these 10 or 11 quotations into flashcards? On one side you could write, what does the below quotation show us about Sheila? And then below it write one of the quotations, and on the other side you could then write some analysis. Either something you've heard from me, in class, read somewhere else, or thought of yourself. Remember though, once you've made them, use the flashcards and test yourself and your memory. Get those quotations stuck in your brain. Or how about answering the exam question that I've just put on screen? I've kept it as generic as possible so that it may be applied to a number of different exam boards. Write an essay and see if you can do it in exam conditions. And that means about your notes too, if you're feeling brave. You could even turn the quotations that you've just made notes on, I hope, into a rap, poem or song. Yes, I know that sounds a bit weird and cheesy, but rhyme can really help to get things stuck into your brain, whilst being creative with the source text can also help you with information retention too. And whether or not you're going to do any of those things, you should also remember to like this video if it's helped you out and you'd like to see more content like this. Drop a comment on the video too, letting me know if it has helped you, asking me a question about Sheila Birling, or even adding in a quotation that you think is worthy of inclusion in this top 10 list. And of course, please don't forget to subscribe if you aren't already. That way you can't miss out on any of the future GCSE English revision content that I put up. And also, it helps me out too. And as ever, I hope that you have an awesome rest of the day. If you are revising, please remember to take frequent short breaks, as a burned out student is not a happy or successful student. And happy and successful, they're two things that you deserve to be. So there we go. Those are our 10 or 11 quotations for Sheila. She goes from petulant, jealous child to a conscientious, caring young woman. A journey that J.B. Priestley has shown to give us hope for the next generation.